Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the absolutely incredible story of a woman who, honestly, didn't even set out to be a writer. Picture this, it's the early 1960s. We're in Enugu, Nigeria, and there's a teacher who suddenly finds herself with a whole lot of downtime. So what does she do? Just to ward off boredom, she starts drafting stories. And little did she know, those very drafts would eventually earn her the legendary title of the mother of modern African literature. Yep, we're talking about the pioneering novelist, publisher, and absolute trailblazer, Flora Nupa.
But right off the bat, you gotta ask, how on earth did a single one guinea stamp change African literature forever? Well, the manuscript that our board teacher wrote eventually found its way into an envelope sent to none other than the legendary Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. Now, Achebe had just been appointed as an advisory editor for the African Writers series, and when he read her work, he was completely blown away. He replied with this glowing letter and actually included 1 guinea inside. That was the exact postage fee she needed to mail her manuscript to a publisher in London. Because of that one single guinea, Flora Nwapa's manuscript made it to the UK, and that led to the publication of the very first internationally published novel by an African woman. Just wild, right?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The guinea that made history. 2. Redefining the African woman. 3. The womanist perspective. 4. Owning the printing press. And finally, 5. A lasting literary legacy.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the guinea that made history, the breakthrough of a bored teacher.
So, setting the stage here. Back in the early 1960s, the African literary scene was basically a boys' club. It seemed totally impenetrable for women. But let's look at Nwapa's timeline. Born in 1931 in Oguta, Nigeria, she actually traveled all the way to Scotland to earn a diploma in education at Edinburgh University in 1958. After returning to teach in Nigeria, she just started penning her stories. As we mentioned, she sent that fateful manuscript to Achebe in 1962, and then boom, just 4 years later, in 1966, her debut novel, Ifuru, was published by Heinemann. You know, it's just this incredible trajectory for someone who initially just wanted to pass the time. She wasn't out chasing fame. She was literally just writing what she knew.
Moving right along to Section 2, redefining the African woman, shattering the stereotypes.
When Nwapa stepped onto the scene, she immediately saw this glaring gender disparity in African literature. Before her, you had this traditional male-authored view that frankly pushed women to the margins. They were mostly depicted as passive, silent victims, or maybe just unhappy wives. Well, Nwapa came in and absolutely shattered those simplistic portrayals. Her view, she saw women as combatants, as economically astute entrepreneurs, and as fiercely independent agents who controlled their own destinies. She brought this desperate, much-needed complexity to the idea of African femininity.
To really see how she pulled this off, let's look at the fictional journey of Amaka. She's the protagonist from Nwapa's 1981 novel, One is Enough. So Amaka starts off in a terrible spot, oppressed and humiliated by her mother-in-law simply for being childless in her marriage, but she absolutely refuses to stay a victim. She actually leaves her husband, packs up, and moves to Lagos to start completely over. There, she gets involved in the wartime attack trade, which means buying and selling goods right across conflict lines. Through sheer grit and serious business acumen, she achieves total economic independence. And the best part? She ultimately refuses to ever marry again because she realizes, hey, I don't need a husband to be a complete person.
Now, this directly connects Amaka's fictional journey right to Nwapa's core real-world ideology. As Nwapa herself famously said, "I feel that every woman, married or single, must have economic independence." Think about that for a second. Economic power wasn't just some clever plot device for Nwapa. It was the actual, tangible mechanism for female liberation in a highly patriarchal society.
All right, into Section 3, the womanist perspective, empowerment without victimhood.
Now, despite her incredibly revolutionary writing, Nwapa actually rejected the label of radical feminist early on. And the crucial distinction here is between Western feminism and African womanism. If we look at it through the lens of scholar Chikwenye Ogunyemi, womanism is a philosophy that celebrates African female strength, community survival, and economic independence. Nwapa rejected that feminist tag because she felt it inherently assumed women were starting from a position of total victimhood. You see, from her own upbringing in Oguta, she was surrounded by these industrious, powerful market women and stories of the mythical water goddess Ogbuide. She saw African women as inherently powerful already. She wanted a politics that nurtured the power they already possessed rather than treating them like helpless victims who needed saving.
Academics have actually been studying the framework of her impact for years.
Take a look at this. In Efuru, her protagonist's resistance to these super restrictive gender norms that define womanhood strictly through marriage and childbearing, becomes a truly subversive act. Even while she's dealing with the intense social stigma of childlessness, Efuru goes out, achieves financial independence, and steps up as a leader. She challenges patriarchal marginalization simply by thriving on her exact own terms. It's brilliant.
And there's a really wide consensus today that Nwapa basically used literature as a weapon against a totally unfair system. She didn't hesitate for a second to propel her female characters into independence. The big takeaway here is this idea that when injustice becomes your normal everyday reality, rebellion isn't just an option, it's a necessity. Nwapa's characters don't just scrape by and survive, they rebel by actively succeeding.
Which brings us to Section 4, owning the printing press, controlling the means of production.
You know, Nwapa's brilliance absolutely wasn't confined to the pages of her novels. She completely understood that to truly change the narrative, you have to control the actual means of production. Following her literary debut in 1966, the devastating Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, broke out. After the war, in 1970, she was appointed Minister of Health and Social Welfare. She was doing the incredibly heavy lifting of rebuilding her region, working directly with orphans and refugees. But by 1974, she saw another massive structural need. Africa needed a publishing infrastructure that wasn't entirely dominated by men. So what'd she do? She founded her own company, paving the way for a whole new generation of African literary heavyweights to emerge throughout the 1990s.
Setting up Tana Press in 1974 was just a monumental game-changer. It was the very first publishing press in Africa run by a woman, and it specifically targeted a large female audience. At a time when literally no one in the traditional publishing world believed that African women even constituted a book-buying demographic, Nwapa knew better. She built the press to inform and educate women about their roles, their economic independence, and their status in the community. Basically, she didn't sit around waiting for a seat at the table. She went out and built the whole table herself.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a lasting literary legacy, the enduring impact of a pioneer.
Flora Nwapa sadly passed away in 1993, but the sheer weight of her accomplishments continues to shape our world right now. Just earning the title Mother of Modern African Literature is massive, all on its own. But even more remarkably, she received the Nigerian chieftaincy title, Ogwefi, which means killer of cow. Now, this is an incredibly high honor that is almost exclusively given to men, so it really proves the extraordinary respect she commanded in the Igbo community. Add to that a posthumous Google Doodle in 2017 and the establishment of the Flora Nwapa Society in 1997, and you are looking at a legacy that perfectly bridges local tradition with massive global acclaim.
And her impact on modern writers, it's just undeniable. Look at this tribute from the literary giant Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She wrote, "If Chinua Achebe and Flora Nwapa had not written the books they did, when they did, and how they did, I would perhaps not have had the emotional courage to write my own." Wow, Nwapa didn't just write books, she gave subsequent generations the emotional courage to exist and to thrive in the literary space. She literally broke the cycle of exclusion.
So we're going to end on this thought. Flora Nwapa used her voice, her pen, and her very own printing press to ensure that the women of her society were seen not as victims, but as fierce warriors and entrepreneurs. She empowered an entire continent of future writers, which kind of makes you wonder, as you look at the media and the literature we're consuming right now, who are today's storytellers empowering for tomorrow? I'm going to leave you to think about that one. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.